So, love is something we don't often talk about at work, in business, in events like this. At least I'm still getting used to it. But it's cool to put it up on a slide because, when you get to a place where you feel comfortable talking about love, it opens up so many cool opportunities. One of our team members was looking at the dictionary searches and found that love is in the top 1% of lookups. So apparently a lot of us are still trying to figure out what is it exactly. For many of us, we're familiar with this kind of love. I know when we post a puppy in a WeWork space on social media, it's like 7,000 likes or something. Picture of me is like 700. So people are familiar with that. I think we're getting more inclusive and expansive in the way we define love and how open we are to it. I think that's a wonderful thing. We obviously use it as part of branding. We think about the messages that we give to the world through companies, through organizations, and creating that bond of love is, I think, one of our highest aspirations. Some of us are still searching for this magical, romantic, perfect love. Hopefully it doesn't always end the way this one did. But still there's that moment where something magical happens. Certainly when we all come together, this aspiration to share love in a group and to feel something together, I think there is still something that is irreplaceable about feeling emotion in a big room, and the people who can inspire that, who can stand on stage and create that collective feeling are still so important. And there's so many factors that go into being able to do this, but certainly when the people who get there, we have so much love for them. I grew up in Oregon where I had a love for shoes like this. It was actually my first experience with a company, with a brand, with that I cared about, that I had passion for. And I think when shoes like this were released, I think it was all I cared about. And definitely my deepest love was getting the latest Foamposite or Air Max or whatever it was. I didn't grow up with my father around, but my mom loved these guys. And she specifically liked John Lennon. There were pictures of him around the house. So in some ways, he was the example of a loving relationship between my mom and her and a man. Now that I have a kid, this isn't mine. He's never done anything like this. But it's a great photo because it shows even in this crazy chaos that a child can create, this would probably be one of the cutest, most loving moments of your life, walking in and finding something like this, even though cleaning it up, on the other hand, would not be fun. So this one's complicated, right? I think we're all still trying to figure out, what does this mean, this little heart, this little like? Is it a sign of love? Is it something else? I don't know that we have the answers now, but it's definitely a big part of our future, trying to understand what does this little heart mean and how many we get and what impact does that have on us. And especially for our kids and for the people who are growing up with this being just a native part of their existence. A very challenging one. This is a cool search. Love is on the top on the blue line. Money's the red line below. So at least in this search, love is still winning over money. For us at WeWork, we started with this, very early on. Do what you love was one of our statements. And to be honest, we didn't think that much about it, except that in an abstract sense, we just felt like more people wanted to be in that place. They wanted to aspire to do what they love every day. They want to come, wake up in the morning and think, what's the point of my life? What am I doing here? And that doing what you love was was a way to at least be on a journey towards that. And so we wanted to create spaces and opportunities and a community around that aspiration. For me, in the early days, my place of love was this is my little brother. This is the middle of the night in Soho before we opened our first building. And I remember we got a quote from a sign maker to make this huge sign. It was like 24 feet by 12 feet, and it was like $25,000, $30,000 to produce and hang this sign. And that was $24,900 more than we had. So we just figured we would do it ourselves, and it's honestly one of my fondest memories was at 3 o'clock in the morning, this huge sign, me and my brother were hanging out of the window in the 6th floor of this building in Soho, trying to strap this building to the side, and we're wrapping all these wires and straps around old fire escapes and tying it through the building to like big, heavy construction objects and stuff. And then at one point, I had to walk a block down the street, and my brother Kyle was like hanging out the window, and I'd be like, just move the right side 1 inch higher. And I remember that moment is like, this is what it's all about, and that's really what I enjoyed was actually doing something, making stuff happen with my own hands. And of course now, as you grow in a company, everything changes, and now I'm trying to love doing things like this, which is, I feel like I'm getting better at it. So it's always changing, this context of love. It's always changing and evolving. And so what does that mean for us? We're so complex as people. We're always changing. There's no formula. There's no way. You wake up one day, you're in a place of love, and then all of a sudden, the next day, it all changes. And so what we tried to start figuring out as a company is if where you want to be is in the center, if this is the aspiration, you're in this place of love. You wake up in the morning with this incredible feeling of goodness, of passion, of awareness about yourself, about where you want to be. That's the best thing. Like that's the highest aspiration for any single day. But then, what are the things that surround you when you're trying to get to this place? Yourself, obviously, a part of it. The world impacts you every day, whether it's the news, whether it's politics, whether it's the things you're involved in. Your friends and family, if your mom calls and starts complaining that you don't come home and visit often enough, that might take you out of a place of love. Being at home could go one way or the other, depending on how that all works. But then work. For so many of us, work is where we spend a huge amount of our time, whether that's in an office, whether that's out in the world. That time of working is taking up so much of our day. And so how does work affect us? How does work give us the opportunity to get to this place? And what are the pushes and pulls in all these areas that can either help us get there or keep us from being in that place? So in the case of work, we actually did some analysis. We were trying to figure out, okay, we say do what you love, we got it on the t-shirt, but what does it really mean for our team members? And a couple of years ago, I made a move from being chief creative officer in our company, which was much more focused on the spaces and the design and the materials and the environments, and more to think, well, we're 1,000 employees now, we're going to grow to who knows how many, 6,000 about now, and if we're really going to create an environment where people are going to succeed, what is that going to look like? And so we ended up having a ton of conversations with people, and we made a list of about 400 things that we felt like were either keeping us from getting to that place of love or, when they're working, pulling us in, when they're not working, keeping us out. And once we saw that and we saw, wow, this isn't, just an ephemeral thing. There are actually real inputs that are affecting this. We started to categorize those things, and we came up with this premise that we could operationalize love. And it's kind of a weird idea. It's not romantic like Romeo and Juliet, but it's really cool if you think about it in a way that is actually manageable. Because again, feeling like you can be proactive about getting to a place of love is actually a pretty cool idea. It's an empowering idea. And so we came up with an overarching system to manage all of these inputs, these 400 or whatever the number is, inputs, and we call it Culture OS. And the premise of Culture OS is that through study of all of these inputs and categorization, we could actually get to a place where every single day we're managing all of those inputs that affect people. And so by studying all of those things, we broke it down into 8 categories. And these categories, you could probably define them in different ways. These are the 8 that work for us, and then so far, in applying them to ourselves and to different companies, we've learned that they're pretty comprehensive. And they allow you to quickly ascertain like what's going on inside. What are the things that are actually amplifying and empowering? What are the things that are holding us back? So once we've figured out that categorization, we started to say, well, how do we learn about the effectiveness of managing those inputs? And the cool thing about our community is that not only do we have ourselves, which is this fast-growing company of 6,000 employees, but then we're also working with all member companies. We have over 250,000. And then now we're in these engagements with a bunch of big enterprises. So one of the crazy transformations that's happened at WeWork is that while we started to support small businesses and entrepreneurs, one of our fastest growing segment is actually working with giant corporations. And what we learned in that is that who we thought were the most disadvantaged in the world were the little guy who was struggling to get a copy made or get the printer to work or deal with bad Wi-Fi. What we actually learned is that the people who work in giant corporations who go into these gray, soul-sucking offices perhaps have it much worse in life. So the cool thing is that both of those are coming together inside of WeWork, and we're getting an opportunity to learn from both and figure out what's really working in each, and then is there a new way to bring them together and bring the learnings together. So we apply that to the way we operate our own culture team. We are using it for M&A, so when we go into an M&A deal, we're acquiring companies to grow faster. It's a super fast way for us to analyze where do our cultures line up and where are there things that don't work, and how do we figure out how to create alignment, and having a shared understanding of culture rather than just thinking of these two blobs like floating in space and then trying to like squish them together. Instead, having a systematic way to address the culture issues has actually been empowering, and we're still learning from it. It's been a big part of how we look at diversity and inclusion, because that's obviously a big thing today that everyone's trying to figure out. But oftentimes it's thought of as an HR initiative or in a narrow channel. The cool thing about using Culture OS for it is it's helped us figure out how is it integrated into every aspect of the business. I mentioned China or M&A. In China, we acquired a company, one of our biggest competitors, and it's actually been super interesting to use Culture OS to try to figure out, how are we integrating. And it's one of the biggest tests because culturally we couldn't be more different, and also the ability to understand what culture even is as a premise is hard over there, just because the inputs are so different. This is total aside, but if you haven't heard, I forget what podcast it is, but there's a really cool podcast where Howard Schultz describes how Starbucks became popular or successful in China, and the key to their success was actually appealing to the parents of all the employees that they wanted to work there. And I thought that was such a cool thing because obviously in China with the one-child policy, where your child works is a really big deal, and there's so many expectations that go into it. And so getting the parents on board for people working at Starbucks was a huge part of unlocking their potential there. And I thought, that's the kind of thing that's just like, we think of culture as so ephemeral, and yet that's actually a very specific input that unlocks an incredible business potential. So those are the kind of things that having an operationalized way to look at these things can help with. So space is what we're known for. This is sort of the old way of working. We've become known for going through an actually sophisticated process of analysis, not just trying to design cool space, but actually taking a whole bunch of inputs to try to figure out how to make spaces that work. We're increasingly doing it for large companies as well as small, and that's been super fun. This is a space, that this is the after, creating spaces that feel good for people to walk into every day is a big part of it. But I think what we're even more excited about is that now that we have this, we can layer on all these other aspects when we work with our member companies. And so citizenship, obviously something that's meaningful to all of us. We've been able to engage in a few different partnerships, and we found that it's really the getting to that place of love. Oftentimes, doing your job every day is a big part of it, but then layering on the other opportunities to do more make a big difference. And so with Charity Water, figuring out how to work with them to just create the recognition that every time you have a metal cup of water, not a plastic one, inside of our space, that you can have a recognition of the fact that many people in the world don't. And then a really cool program that actually started this woman, Fatima Duran, who started a program internally of just hiring refugees in one building, turned into a partnership with IRC and a commitment to hire over 1,500 refugees into WeWork operations in the next few years. So that empowering that grassroots initiative, it's cool to see that people feel like it's in their hands, like they have the opportunity to make a difference. And then as soon as we see something cool, jumping on it and saying, let's amplify that, multiply it. And so how do you, when you think about culture and you think about your responsibility in creating and running organizations, what are you really trying to do? What's your responsibility? And what can you give to people who are on their own journey to try to figure out how they can become their best self, how they can reach their place of self-actualization, how they can be whoever they want to be in the world? It's really creating an environment and a culture that allows them to find their superpower and to create an infrastructure that empowers them to have an impact. So culture is, again, something we often think about as this flowing thing that surrounds us. But if you can take something away from this, I think it's that you should think of culture as actually a system of inputs that you can design and operate in order to create the output that you want. And so I encourage you, in whatever it is that you do, to take responsibility for that, to take really control of the culture that surrounds you, and to do everything you can to unlock the people that you work with and to unlock yourself through this engagement and and this operational approach to love. So thank you guys for having me, and wish you the best.